Pennsylvania, a land of quiet towns, fog-choked valleys, and forests older than memory. Beneath its peaceful hills lie mines that still burn, tunnels that never end, and whispers that drift through the trees long after midnight. For centuries, this place has carried secrets, stories too strange, too haunting to be told in daylight. Some call them legends, others call them warnings. Because if you listen closely, you'll find that every small town in this state has something it tries to forget. A shadow behind the church steeple, a cry in the woods, a figure waiting at the end of a dirt road. And tonight, we're going to open those doors. We'll travel through the heart of Pennsylvania, uncovering the stories buried beneath its soil. Tales of voices that never stopped echoing, ghosts that still walk its mountains, and fires that burn from beneath the ground. So before we begin, turn off the lights, lock your doors, and listen carefully. Because some stories don't just haunt Pennsylvania, they live here. Welcome to the Pennsylvania Horror Stories. Now let's begin with the first tale. They called it a town with a human heartbeat, Centralia, Pennsylvania. Houses, churches, and stores once stood, shoulder to shoulder above a sort of patchwork of coal veins that had fed the region for a century. People lived and died there, with the smell of coal in their lungs and the dust of mines in their boots. What no one imagined was that the town would be kept alive by a different kind of fire. A slow, secret blaze bruising the earth beneath their feet. The story begins in the spring of 1962. Centralia's borough council, like many small towns, was preparing for Memorial Day. Trash had accumulated in an old, strip mine pit near the Oddfellows Cemetery. The usual quick burn was meant to clean the refuse, to clear the land so the grave sites would be presentable for the holiday. They set it alight, and the fire went where it was not supposed to go. The flames found openings in the ground and slipped into a labyrinth of abandoned anthracite, mines that threaded the land like veins beneath the town. The underground fire, once started, refused to be forgotten. At first, nobody could see the disaster. Roads and roofs still gleamed in the sun. Children still chased baseballs in alleys. Then in the months after the burn, steam began to seep from cracks in the pavement. Snow that fell in winter melted in strange patches. One farmer noticed smoke coiling from a field. A gas station owner stuck a dipstick into his underground storage and found the ground itself different, warmer, trembling with something beneath it. Experts came, probes were drilled, projects were launched to douse and contain the blaze. They tried excavation. They tried flushing crushed rock and water into the seams. They burned money and hope alike. The fire carried on. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Centralia became a town at war with an invisible enemy. Carbon monoxide readings climbed in basements. Sinkholes yawned open in yards where roses once grew. The state and federal governments debated what to do. Families argued about staying and leaving. For a while, the town limped on. Schools, mail, municipal meetings, until the danger could no longer be papered over. The government moved in with buyouts and condemnation. Roads were closed, houses were demolished, and the population that had numbered in the thousands dwindled to a few stubborn holdouts. The fire, stubborn, subterranean, patient, remained. But history alone is not the real terror. The real terror, the black, small thing that lives in smoke and forgets names, comes from what the people who stayed said they heard at night. Not just steam, but voices that rose like steam, whispering from vents in the road. They told of voices that mimicked the old hymns sung at St. Ignatius, of distant laughter that might have been children's, but that sounded wrong, as if the syllables had been stretched thin and bruised by heat. They swore their radios hummed with channels that had no station. They spoke in the hush after dawn of the ground that seemed to breathe. Those whispers became the rumor that Centralia was not only burning but listening. This is where the true base story bends into a darker telling. They named him Thomas Kincaid. Though some called him Tommy the Mechanic, some called him a neighbor. He was not a mayor or an engineer. He was the sort of man who fixed lawnmowers and lent a hand when someone's car broke down. Tommy had lived in Centralia his whole life. He knew every cracked stoop, every spring in the playground, every seam in the pavement where the ground sighed. When the buyouts came, when most left, Tommy refused. He said the town would need someone to keep the lights on, to watch the mailbox, to be the last witness to what had happened there. He stayed for stubbornness, for dignity, and for the memory of his wife who was buried in the odd little cemetery on the hill. At first, his nights were like everyone else's, the distant gurgle of a furnace, the soft tremor of passing traffic on Route 42. Then he began to notice patterns. There was a place behind his garage where steam rose at the same hour, 3 in the morning, and it always smelled like old pennies and wet coal. One night, Tommy followed the steam. He knelt and pressed his ear to the ground. Beneath the damp soil, there was a whisper, not of words at first, but of syllables like gravel. The sound formed into softer, slower syllables, and then, astonish. Ingly it sang, a single cracked note like a church bell underwater. He could have sworn the note held the shape of the town's names. The butcher, the baker, the names of children he'd watched grow up. Neighbors who bristled at the government call-outs, laughed at the notion of voices in the ground. But the sheltered air of late July was thin and still that year, and the whispers spread like steam. Cars stalled in the street, their ignitions failing. A dog skulked away from a backyard, hair raised like a hedgerow. A mailbox that had stood for decades tipped over, its post charred at the base. Some nights, Tommy swore he could hear his wife's voice call for him by the creek, clear as any call from the living. He walked the lane, calling back. The voice replied, not with her old laugh, but with the slow, hollow shaping of a different breath. One autumn night, the thing under the town took a step further. A sinkhole opened in the center of Broad Street. VEAO, warping maw that swallowed a mailbox and a stack of mail. Men scrambled to the edge and peered in. Steam rose from the collapse in a pale column, and through the steam, something like a reflection, a single bright face, seemed to look back. The next morning, letters from a family's mailbox were found down in the fissure, soot-marked and singed, addressed to neighbors who had lived 50 years earlier. The postmark dated to the 1960s. People who remembered the names recognized them as long-gone relatives. The town called it an anomaly. Tommy called it a message. By winter, the list of oddities grew. Thermometers in some yards read 40 degrees when it snowed. Garden fences bubbled with emerging steam. Rains left wells that still steamed the next day. A visiting geologist drove through with the Department of Mines and shivered when he measured underground temperatures. Pockets of fire lay 30 feet down, pockets that escaped the reach of drills and pumps. In 1963, early remediation plans had failed. By the 1970s and 80s, more determined projects were proposed and abandoned. The fire's appetite was not for wood and garbage alone. It ate the seams, the breath between earth and town. The government eventually bought out most of Centralia's properties. Roads were rerouted and bulldozers moved in. But the place resisted erasure. Where houses were pulled down, the ground leaked like an old wound. Some who left later told reporters that Centralia felt like a place where names were not safely buried. Letters came back, voices on old tapes, returned fragments of recent conversations recorded years earlier. Journalists came and called it a cursed place. Scientists called it a mind problem. Everyday people called it a tragedy to mourn. The categories overlapped. No single label fixed the thing. One spring, decades after the burn began, Tommy disappeared. He'd been found each morning for a while after, tending an old shed or sweeping the walk. He loved his town the way a man loves a house where every floorboard remembers him. Then he simply did not answer a caller at the diner. His truck remained in the drive, keys in the ignition. A neighbor who went to check on him found the garage door open and the yard's grass singed in a neat circle. The neighbor did not disturb the circle. The story that spread through the county said Tommy walked a little too close to an opening, and a rush of air, hot and smelling, of iron, took him. No body was ever found. In the bottom of a fissure, people later found a small tin of tobacco, Tommy's brand, half buried in soot as if dropped in a hurry. The town became a place of relics, burned-out mailboxes, abandoned houses coated in vines, a single highway sign leading to nowhere. It made for good television. Ghost hunters camping on the blacktop, photographers setting spectral scenes, tourists snapping pictures of steam curling out of manhole covers. But even the spectacle could not take away from the quiet grief of those who had lived there. Stories of voices and letters and the man who listened became part of their mourning. Scientists still caution that mine fires can burn for decades and even centuries, or the seams are long and the coal's hunger is patient. Centralia's underground fire, given the reports and measurements, could continue to burn for generations. If there is a moral here, it is not a tidy warning about landfill regulation or municipal error. It's that some mistakes linger in the world like embers. Small, then stubborn, then a lingering heat that refuses to die. A town's life is a weave of memory and sound. When the ground itself begins to sing the names of the dead, when letters come back stamped with decades-old ink, the living cannot easily know whether to mourn, to fear, or to go home. When you pass Centralia today, if you follow the single road that still threads by the cemetery, if you see the steam wreathe through a cracked highway, remember this. The fire beneath did not simply consume coal. It kept the town's voices for itself, like a miser hoarding coins. If you listen in the night, you might hear the town answer back, and you might catch your own voice in its reply. That is the thing to imagine when the sun goes down over a place like Centralia. Not only ruin, but the eerie persistence of what we leave behind. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a city known for its history, its art, its people, and one house that refuses to stay silent. They say the Baleroy Manor is one of America's most haunted homes, a mansion filled with cursed antiques, restless spirits, and one very special chair that's said to kill whoever dares to sit in it. But this isn't some old legend passed down through generations. This story is about a man who wanted to prove it was all fake. And what he found inside made believers out of everyone who heard his name. Elliot Crane wasn't the type to believe in ghosts. He was 32, confident, practical, an architect from Philadelphia, who'd just inherited a small fortune from his late father. While others dreamed of new cars and vacations, Elliot dreamed of restoration, of bringing dead buildings back to life. So when he heard that the Baleroy Manor in Chestnut Hill was up for sale, abandoned for decades, he saw potential. He saw beauty in the decay. He didn't realize the house saw him too. When Elliot first stepped inside, the air felt heavier, not like dust or age, but as if the walls themselves were breathing. He walked through the halls, flashlight in hand, and each step echoed as if the floors remembered every footstep ever taken. Paintings watched him. Doors groaned quietly as he passed, and then he entered what the realtor called the Blue Room. It was empty, except for one thing. A mahogany chair with royal blue velvet cushions stood perfectly in the center, bathed in a beam of sunlight that shouldn't have reached that far inside. Elliot smiled. "This will look great once it's cleaned up," he said aloud. Then he noticed something scratched into the wall behind it. Just 2 words: "Sit and see." He brushed his fingers across the carving. The wood felt colder than the air around it. He laughed it off, snapped a picture, and moved on. But something in that room followed him out. For the first week, things were quiet. Elliot stayed on the 2nd floor while workers repaired the plumbing and replaced the windows. But every night he'd hear faint noises, the creak of a chair moving on its own, a low hum that sounded like someone breathing through the walls. He told himself it was just old wood and bad wiring, until the cameras started catching things. He had set up motion sensors in each hallway, just to protect the antiques. But on the 3rd night, one of them triggered at 3:03 a.m. When he checked the footage, he froze. There was a figure standing by the Blue Room door, still, faintly human-shaped, but blurry and flickering, like bad reception on a television. Then the figure walked backward into the dark, disappearing through the wall. The next morning, Elliot went to check the room. The chair had moved, just a few inches closer to the door. He didn't remember leaving it that way. That same day, he found an old photograph tucked into one of the desk drawers in the study. It showed the mansion's former owner, George Meade Easby, smiling proudly beside the very same chair. In the photo, George's hand rested on its arm, and on closer inspection, Elliot noticed something horrifying. There was another hand, pale and skeletal, resting right over George's. That night he heard whispers coming from the Blue Room. Not voices. Exactly. more like the sound of someone trying to speak underwater. He followed the noise, flashlight shaking in his hand. The moment he opened the door, everything went still. The room was empty, except for the chair. Its blue fabric seemed darker than before, almost wet, and for reasons he couldn't explain, Elliot sat down. The temperature dropped instantly. His breath fogged in front of him. In the reflection of the window, he saw his own face, but the reflection didn't blink when he did. He leaned forward, confused, and that's when he heard it. A whisper, right beside his ear. "You belong now." He jumped up, heart pounding, and the light above him shattered. Glass fell like rain. The door slammed shut behind him, locking from the inside. He screamed and kicked at it until it broke open, and when he turned around, the chair was gone. For days after, Elliot tried to tell himself it was a dream, but things kept happening. The mirrors began fogging from the inside, as if something was breathing behind them. His name appeared on the walls, written in faint blue smears. And every night, without fail, one window on the third floor glowed with a dim blue light. Neighbors said they could hear someone playing piano at 2 a.m., even though the house hadn't had power for days. Then one evening, Elliot disappeared. Police found his car still in the driveway, his belongings untouched. But the chair, the blue room chair, had been dragged into the basement. Scratched into the floor beside it were fresh initials, E.C. Elliot Crane. No one knows what happened to him after that night. The mansion remains empty, well, as empty as it can be. Locals say if you drive by Baleroy Manor at the right hour, you'll see the windows flicker blue. Some say it's the ghost of Easby, others say it's the chair, searching for someone new to sit. But a few, the ones who've actually stood at its gates, swear they saw a man watching from the upper balcony, bathed in a blue glow, smiling faintly as if he recognized them. They say the mansion no longer needs an owner. It already has one. And sometimes, on quiet Philadelphia nights, the light turns on by itself. They say the earth beneath Pennsylvania never really sleeps. It breathes, it groans, and in one forgotten town it burns. The place was once called Ash Hollow, a mining community just south of Centralia, before it was wiped from every modern map. No one lives there now, or at least no one should. But the locals still whisper about the lights that flicker in the hills at night, about the voices that rise through the smoke, and about one woman who went there, looking for answers, and found something waiting for her in the fire. Her name was Rachel Keene, 37 years old, journalist, skeptic, a woman who believed every mystery had an explanation, until the fire called her name. Rachel had grown up in Scranton, about 2 hours north. As a kid, her father used to tell her ghost stories, all set in Ash Hollow. He'd describe the town as if it were alive, breathing under their feet. He'd say, "If you stand quiet enough, you can hear the ground whisper." Rachel had always laughed it off, thinking he made it up to keep her from wandering too far from home. But when her father passed, she found something strange among his belongings. A faded photograph, black and white, curling at the edges. In it, her father stood in front of a wooden sign. "Welcome to Ash Hollow, population 112. The smoke behind him rose like a living thing, and in that smoke, half hidden, was a shape. A shadow that looked like it was watching him. The date on the back read 1979, 17 years after the town was supposedly evacuated. Rachel couldn't shake it. She spent nights staring at that photo, zooming in on the blur behind her father's shoulder. She even dreamed about it. The hiss of smoke, her father's outline, and a voice whispering through the static of her sleep. Come home. 2 weeks later, she packed her recorder, camera, and notebook and drove south toward the ruins. The trip took her through stretches of forest that felt untouched by time. The further she drove, the quieter it got. No other cars, no animals, no birds. By the time she reached the first road closed sign, the air smelled like iron and sulfur. The horizon shimmered with heat, even though it was autumn. She parked on the side of the cracked highway and stepped out. The sound was the first thing that struck her. A low, distant rumble that never stopped. The ground vibrated faintly under her boots. When she knelt, she could feel warmth rising through the cracks in the pavement. Ash Hollow wasn't supposed to exist anymore, but there it was. The remains of homes, half swallowed by the earth. Telephone poles leaning like gravestones, and in the distance, a single church steeple still standing against the haze. Rachel clicked on her recorder. This is Rachel Keene, investigating the site known locally as Ash Hollow, a community destroyed by an underground mine fire. Locals claim the fire's still burning. I want to find out how much of that is true. As she walked, she noticed something odd. Tire tracks in the dust. Fresh ones? Someone had been here recently. Near the old church, she found a rusted mailbox still standing. The number painted on the side was 112, the same number from her father's photo. Her pulse quickened. She pushed the door open. Inside, the air was warm, not from the sun, but from below. The wallpaper had peeled away in strips, and the floorboards sagged. She moved carefully, whispering to herself, trying to steady her nerves. This house shouldn't still be standing. On the mantel above the fireplace hung an old picture frame. The glass was cracked, the photo behind it burned. Only one face remained untouched, a man standing near the back. Her father. Rachel's hand trembled as she lifted the frame. Beneath it, etched faintly into the soot, was a name. Keene. Her last name. She felt her throat tighten. "Dad?" she whispered. And then came the sound, faint but clear, the creak of a step upstairs. She froze. "Hello?" No response, just the settling groan of the house. She climbed the stairs slowly, one hand gripping the rail. The closer she got to the top, the stronger the heat became. At the end of the hall was a door, slightly open, light flickering underneath. She pushed it open. The room was empty, except for an old bed frame and a mirror on the far wall. The floor beneath the bed glowed faintly, as if fire lived just under the boards. Rachel stepped closer. Her reflection in the mirror was distorted by heat waves, and then it spoke. "Rachel." Her heart stopped. The voice wasn't in her head. It came from below. She dropped to her knees, staring at the cracks in the floor. Smoke curled upward, and for a moment, she saw something moving in it. Not fire, but faces. Dozens of them, shifting and fading, their mouths moving soundlessly. One face she recognized, her father. She stumbled back, gasping. The floorboards blackened under her feet. "Dad, what happened here?" The air rippled, and the voice came again, broken and distant. "You shouldn't have come here." The ground shuddered, and suddenly she was falling, crashing through the weakened boards into darkness. When she landed, her flashlight flickered. She was in a tunnel. The air was thick with smoke, and faint orange light pulsed along the walls. Coal veins, burning like veins in a body. Rachel coughed, trying to stand. Every surface she touched was warm, and in that half-light, she saw them. Figures. People, miners, women, children, all frozen mid-motion. Their skin turned gray, their eyes hollowed out. They stood like statues carved from ash. At the far end of the tunnel, something moved. A man stepped forward. His features were burned beyond recognition, but she could see his eyes glowing faintly. "Dad?" He didn't speak. He simply reached for her, and when he did, the heat intensified until she could barely breathe. The fire roared beneath their feet, and she heard 1,000 whispers rising all around her. Angry, pleading, endless. "Rachel." The tunnel walls began to melt. She turned and ran, lungs burning, trying to find a way out. Every path led back into the fire, until she saw a faint circle of light above her. A hole, barely wide enough to crawl through. She clawed her way up, fingernails breaking, skin blistering from the heat. As she pulled herself through, she could feel hands, hot, ashy hands, grabbing at her legs, trying to drag her back down. She screamed, kicked free, and collapsed on the surface. The ground was silent again, the air cold. She lay there trembling, staring up at a gray, smoky sky. When she finally stood, she realized she was standing behind the church. The steeple was gone. The bell lay cracked in the dirt, and at the edge of the clearing, she saw her car. Relief hit her like a wave. She ran toward it, but when she reached it, her relief turned to confusion. The car was covered in dust. Her own handprints were already on the window. The keys sat on the seat, rusted. She stepped back, heart racing. No, that's not possible." Then, from somewhere behind her came the sound of footsteps. She turned, and there he was. Her father, standing in the middle of the road, covered in soot. His eyes hollow, he raised one hand and pointed toward the smoke rising from the trees. "Go home," he said. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint smell of burning coal. When she looked back, he was gone. Days later, a search party found her recorder near the church steps. It was still running. The last minute of audio was a single whisper on repeat. Her own voice, faint and broken. "I hear them now. They never stopped burning. No one ever found Rachel Keene. But every few months, truckers driving through the area report seeing a woman in the fog, walking barefoot along the old highway. She doesn't look lost. She looks like she's listening. And when they roll down their windows, they swear they can smell smoke. The kind that comes from underground, old, eternal, and hungry."